Well, today we're discussing the difference between Sony and Fuji. So, let's get to talking. So one of the things that it comes down to the difference between Sony cameras and Fuji cameras is really the photographer. And what I mean by that is not really necessarily the difference in people, how they photograph, but more of the ideas behind when you use a Sony to a Fuji. And that's kind of coming from my personal experience, and I think you'll probably agree. See, I've been talking to people online and friends online about Fuji and what it means to them. For me, it's honestly helped me out to take a step back when it comes down to photography, to really focus on seeing the beauty in everything, versus my Sony camera kind of makes me feel like I have to be perfect and it has to be professional every step of the way. So there's a difference sometimes even with like Sony cameras. For me, it's just like having to take a photo. I'm like, I can't really just see what I'm taking visually, because one of the main things that comes down to with the Fuji cameras is the film simulations. And when it comes down to the film simulations, to be honest, it's really cool because you're able to see how the photo is going to look inside the camera to get an idea of what you want to do for composition, the lighting and everything. So you kind of have that, everything in the camera versus having to create it with the Sony. So I made a video a while back talking about a cool feature that most cameras should have, because it was an inspiration from the Fuji, is being able to actually put in your Lightroom presets inside the camera to be able to see a little bit more of the colors. I know Sony has their kind of creative profiles or whatever they have, but in reality, for me, it's just not really that creative. When it comes down to the Fuji recipes, it just feels different, and it honestly makes me feel more artistic rather than a professional, but in a good way. So recently, went to New York and Toronto, and one of the things that I did a lot was use my Fuji camera to kind of create stories within itself, within the camera, without having to do any post editing. That's one of the things that kind of made me just see the photography in a different light, and that's something that I think Fuji does very well with their cameras. It makes you feel, I guess, like a true photographer, a true content creator, that it's more artistic side where you don't have to focus on every little detail being perfect, but you just kind of feel like it's just artistic. And I use my Sony a lot when it came down to creating my YouTube videos and a lot of portraits and stuff, but it just felt more like a job, if that makes sense. For me, it was more professional, had to be like kind of the typical banger shots that everybody's always looking for the Instagram worthiness. And sometimes it's a turn off when it comes down to going out to shoot photos. See, I've personally taken quite of my favorite, more artistic photos recently using only my Fuji with some film recipes and doing no post editing to post into my stories on Instagram. And I feel like it's been pretty cool to do. I feel like it makes me feel just more creative in a healthy way, where I'm not really focused on what's going to be maybe give me more likes or whatever. It's more creating for myself. And despite obviously with Sony, I can still do that and stuff like that, but sometimes to me personally, it just seems more like a chore, which I'm trying to not let it be. Actually, when I was in New York City, I felt like it was more the creative outlet of being in a good city like that made me just create. With my Sony, I felt like I could create some great photos and be creatively inspired, but my Fuji has just made me feel inspired again with just the way that it looks in camera, what you can do, just the retro feeling of it, and just posting those photos and everything like that, just whether it's in my story or whatever, it feels different in a good way, and it feels healthy to create with it. And I feel like that's a big difference between shooting with Fuji versus a Sony or even other cameras in general. But since I shoot Sony, that's, I guess my example in comparison. Because personally, I think the main difference when it comes down to the Fuji cameras, and this is something that I've seen a little bit more online and things like that, is just saying how people think Fuji's a cult, but so is Sony. Everybody's gonna be cultish with their own brands, but why people really love, I think, Fuji in general is just because the colors, the feel, the nostalgia and recipes, it just makes you feel creative, it makes you feel great. And Sony does it too, but in a different way. And that's the whole point of this. It's not to sound like I'm repeating it or anything like that, but it's just Sony to me, it's a great workhorse of a camera, but Fuji is more of a enjoyment. And not sure if that makes sense, but hopefully it does make sense for you guys and if you relate to it. But that's kind of like how I feel when it comes down to taking out one camera to the other. I use my Fuji camera as my everyday kind of style of photos versus using even my phone, because I like to document certain things with my Fuji to then post it onto my social media for my stories, because it just makes me feel artistically creative. And with my Sony, I kind of hold off more onto my creative side when it comes down to making videos for YouTube or portraits or more professional work, which it's great. It makes me feel artistic, great, and everything in a different way. But I feel like inspirational wise, I feel Fuji has become a big stepping stone for people and creatives in general to create without pressure. But even like today, like perfect example, like I know that there's not much going on right now. And if I have my Sony only, I started kind of looking for things that would be like the Instagram worthy photos, which I hate feeling that way lately. And whenever I use my Fuji, I don't feel that way. I feel like I can take a photo of a patch of grass and it makes it just look like, see it in a different way, see the beauty of the photo in that aspect, versus the Sony in general. Whenever I have it in hand, I feel like I have to find something that's gonna be, and I don't wanna say clickbaity, but almost clickbaity, that people want to see and click and like and share and everything. And it shouldn't be that way when it comes down to creating. And I feel like that's what has become more with the Sony cameras, is what kind of, I guess, camera will have for when it comes down to having the better specs that people can get some good shots with it and the more cinematic feeling of it, because that's how it almost feels like they're promoting it and marketing it, versus just Fuji, to me, without seeing much of their marketing, it just makes it feel like more people use it for the artistic purpose and just enjoying the process of photography. Like if you were almost shooting film or just taking your time with it, rather than kind of having to have fast, frame rates or anything like that. Could have gotten a bird photo apparently, but neither camera caught it. Yay. Is it coming back? Yes, it is. Sony for the win. Oh, here comes a buddy. That's kind of cool. See, if I didn't have my Sony camera, I wouldn't be able to capture all the nice, birds far away, because of the bird eye autofocus and a bigger lens and everything like that. But when it comes down to the Fuji, I can just kind of appreciate the moment of how it looks out here and take a photo and then just kind of have it for social media to post without worry. So that's one of the cool things about it. I mean, it's good to have both. There's pros and cons to every, camera that you'll ever use, but that's just kind of my thought process when it comes down to this. Oh, hello, buddy. He didn't go into the sunset, sadly. But when it comes down to Fuji versus Sony or just things like this, what do you think about the camera companies and what do they make you feel? My main thing is to know, and I guess to talk with people, is what their thought process is with using each camera brand, or why do you use one or the other? That's something that is always interesting to me, to see how everybody's thought process becomes whenever they use certain, cameras or brands or whatever, and their choices to use them. Obviously, I love both camera brands and I choose to shoot with both, and for different reasons. So maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, but would love to know your thoughts down below. But with all that said and done, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with a friend. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.